Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So in this video I'd like to give you guys an update on my Ensete ventricosum plants here. So I've got 4 of them that I've overwintered from last year. The 2 on the left here, these are the normal Ensete ventricosum, so the green leaf variety. And these were the ones that grew really large last summer in my 2 whiskey barrel planters at the front of the house. And then on the right, this is my Ensete ventricosum Maurelii, which is like the red Abyssinian banana. So basically this has that lovely red patterning on the leaves. This plant was a lot smaller and I bought this as a small plant last year and grew it out in the garden. So I wanted to get more of these as it's quite a nice red colour in the leaves. So that's why I cut that one in half, and I'll show you how the process is going in propagating that. The other 2 ones, the 2 green Ensete ventricosums, they were actually grown from seed last year. I was very happy with how big they grew considering it was the first time I've ever grown them from seed. So I'll give you a closer look of how these are doing. Basically with Ensete ventricosums, they're not hardy, so they need to be brought inside so that they don't get a hard frost and killed. So one of the best ways to store them is to dry store them. If you try and grow them over winter, because the winters are so dark and cold here in Scotland, even in a heated conservatory, there just wouldn't be enough light for them. I would need grow lamps probably to keep them growing. So one of the best things is just to dry store them. So the way you do that is you cut all the leaves off, cut most of the roots off, and then you just leave it in a cool, dry place for it to go dormant. And with these Ensete ventricosum bananas, there's a lot of energy stored in them. Basically inside the trunk towards the bottom, there's a big sort of corm thing which stores a lot of energy and carbohydrate for growth next year. And also in the trunk itself, it stores a lot of carbohydrate in the old stalks of the leaf that form up the trunk. So there's a lot of energy stored in these, a lot of water as well. So as long as it's not too warm, they won't dry out and you can just keep them dry. If you keep them damp, the problem is they will go rotten. So these I dug up last autumn. I think it was late November. We were very late with the first hard frost, so I was very lucky keeping them growing for so long. I then just kept them in my conservatory. I just got the plastic bags for transporting them because otherwise the soil falls off and makes a lot of mess in my house. So I'll give you a close-up of how they're doing. Basically the top side, this is the side that was on the top the whole time. This has done the best. The leaves, some of them are shriveled up and died, but most of it's still very firm and looking quite good. On the underside though, I probably should have rotated them more often. I've basically not rotated them at all. You can see it's kind of been flattened. That's where it was sitting on the ground. And this is a lot softer. It's kind of going rotten and it's a lot wetter as well. So there's a chance that that could introduce rot. So what I'll probably do is I'll strip off some of the really rotten material. I'll also strip off some of this drier material. And then at the top half, this one's looking actually pretty good. This is the slightly smaller out of the 2, it's a lot lighter. That one's actually almost twice the weight. Although it looks shorter, it's actually a lot thicker and wider, so there's a lot more mass in that one. This one though is the one that's doing the best. You can see it's actually got some green leaves that are trying to grow out, but they're absolutely infested with aphids there. You can see they're absolutely covered. So what I'll be doing is I'll be cutting the top off of this just to remove all those aphids, get them out of the way so they won't reinfest any of the new leaves that come out. And this one over here isn't looking as good. It did try pushing out a new leaf, but it's actually died and gone rotten. So this one I'm a little worried about. I'm going to cut this back a bit further, see if I can find some new green leaves further down, and hopefully that will resprout and recover. But this one, although it's a bigger plant with more energy stored and has the most chance of growing quickly once it gets going again, at the moment it's not looking too good because the central point is looking quite dead. So I'll cut that back and see how it looks. And then once I've cut them back, cleaned them up, the idea is I'm going to pot them up into plant pots, put them in my conservatory and get them to start growing and come back into life. It's now March here in Scotland and the spring equinox is only another week away. Once the spring equinox comes, the days are longer than the nights and we get decent light levels here in Scotland. But until the spring equinox, the winter season is very dark here, so it'll be too early for having these starting to grow because there just wouldn't be enough light for them. So I'm going to be potting them up now. By the time they're growing the leaves, it should be April. We should have good light levels. It will also be slightly warmer in my conservatory, so they should grow quite well. And then come June time, when the last of the frosts have gone, I'll put these outside. I'll let them grow outside all summer long. So my other 2 Ensete ventricosums here, it was one plant. I've cut it in half. I'm going to do a separate video about this, but I'll just quickly update you with how it's doing now. Basically, you break off the original growing point in Ensete ventricosum and it causes lots of side shoots to come up and you can propagate new plants from that. It's a bit different to most banana plants. Most banana plants, they naturally send up side shoots and suckers from the base, known as pups, that you can then remove and make new plants from. But with Ensete ventricosum, the only way you can do that is from seed. But if you've got a cultivated variety like this one here, which has nice leaf colour, if you seed grow it, you won't get exactly the same variety again. So you need to actually do this from vegetative propagation. So with this, as it doesn't send up pups, you have to damage the central growing point. It then goes into shock, and it basically grows all this kind of like mass like this. This is basically a bit like stem cells in humans. It's a mass of cells which can become anything, but they don't really know what to do, so they just keep growing in a massive mass like this. And then eventually they start differentiating into shoots, and you can see there's a few just down here. It looks a bit maybe like a worm or something, but there's 3 of them just down there. They're the new shoots starting to come. And because there's the central point is removed, there's nothing to inhibit the side growth, so there'll be probably hundreds of these little shoots coming up, and eventually you'll probably get about 5 or 10 which are dominant, and then you can divide them in the future to make new plants. Whereas this side, because I cut it in half, there was a bit of the original meristem, or like the central growing point, and that's what's come up here. It took a while to get established, but you can see this is the main plant now. And because it's got a main shoot starting to grow, the hormones from that will suppress any of the other dormant shoots which might be trying to grow from emerging. So this is likely just to be one plant here, whereas this one will probably split into 10 or 15, which I can then propagate out and give myself more plants. So that's the 2 large Ensetes now cleaned up. Now there was a bit more rot than I was expecting. Basically all the black bits on the stem seem to be dead and rotting, so you can see I've cut most of that off. Now there's a bit left, but the rot shouldn't spread too much, especially now it'll be in a warmer location where it's slightly less humidity, and it'll be upright and starting to grow. So the areas that are rotting now, they should dry out and stop rotting, so it shouldn't really spread. And with this one, this is the one that I was worried that the end was dead and the main growing point. You can see the end there is pretty bad looking, but I cut down and actually it's really good in the middle and further down, so I'm not worried about this either. This should be absolutely fine. But you can see I had to shorten that quite a lot to cut that off, get to a decent growing point. This one is actually a little bit more concerning. There's a bit of darkness in the middle there, but again I think that's probably going to be okay. This one here is looking pretty healthy. You can actually see quite a lot of sap and water starting to come out of that now. But the 2 plants are mostly in good condition. They have been stored for several months, so that's why they've degraded a little bit. So what I'm going to do now is pot them up in some rich multi-purpose compost. I'll water the compost just a very small amount, just so that the root can detect there's some moisture there and start growing, but I won't water them much, because without the leaves they won't really be needing much water, and the compost will stay very wet, and that could cause rotting. So I have to be quite careful not to water too much, otherwise the base could start rotting, and if the base rots, that's the main issue, because that's where the kind of starchy material and the main energy stored for the plant is right at the bottom there. So that's the most important part for me to keep alive. And the good thing with these bananas is it's the middle point and the bottom that's the most important, so you can lose a lot of this stuff on the outside. So here, for example, I've cut off a lot of those old dead leaves, and they just kind of protect the middle section. So the way it works is a bit like an onion. There's loads of layers, and it's the middle that's the most important, so you can sacrifice all these outer layers and it's not going to be a major issue. So I'll just go ahead now and plant these up into some new compost and pots. So that's them now potted up. The pots do look very small, but they actually are quite large pots. They're 10-litre pots. They just look really small because the Ensetes are so big. So ideally these plants would actually have much bigger pots, but I don't really have the space or the amount of compost and large pots to really pot them up into a pot that's big enough for them. And as this is only temporary, probably for about 2 or 3 months until they start growing in spring, and they're not going to really grow much in the first month because they'll be getting their roots established. This pot size is okay for now, but when it comes to summer, they'll either be going in the really big whiskey barrels, which are about 150 litres each, I think, in size, or they'll be going straight in the ground, so they'll have plenty of root space. But that's all they'll be having for now. I'll put them in the conservatory. It's still a bit cool in the conservatory because European gas prices are so high at the moment. I'm not heating it much, but on sunny days it does get up to about 18 degrees, and as time goes on into April, it should hopefully get into the low 20s, maybe high 20s Celsius, so that should really get them to grow quite nicely. So I'll give you guys an update later in summer when I'll be planting these out in the garden, and I'll probably be combining them with my other banana trees which I've been growing from seed. I'll give you an update on how they're all doing.